Got 3 days. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, see, we're almost there.
So
Okay.
personification is more likely to related to people's behavior.
So personification is when you take an object and make it as if it has a personality. Yeah.
And human characteristics.
Yeah. Human characteristics. So I think this is really helpful to me, and we will have some lessons in what each of those are, because that's when we move from quote unquote English into the concept of literature. And as I read today, I will point out some things as I see them. Okay. I think that will be helpful. Yeah. So we'll at the beginning of next semester, we'll do some work on the whole concepts of the literary and poetic devices. Yeah. And these are used in any language. I mean, this is not unique to English by any stretch of the imagination. It's every language uses it. It's just a matter of how do you identify them in the English language. You know, one of the things that is kind of frustrates me about teaching in this country is that when you're in elementary school, and Lucy, you may remember this, they call it language arts. Do you remember that? Yeah, like right through kind of all of elementary school. When you're young, they call it language arts, but you're really learning English. And then now what they call it English, but it's really language arts. It's the art of language. And so, you know, identifying all of that and what are the themes and what are, you know, so that's why we go deeply into these novels, because it's really about language art. Do they? English language arts, ELA, is that what they call it? Yeah. I need to go get my water.
Because like I'll be like going like TikTok or something, and it'll be about like English or something or about school. And it's like you look at the comments and there's like this one girl who's like, oh, I hate like ELA.
ELA. Yeah.
It's easy, but okay.
Yeah. Right, it's only going to get harder. Okay. All right, I left my water in the other room. I'm going to run and get it. I will be right back. All righty. Okay, so we are on chapter 41. Chapter 41. So we know now that there is a 2-year-old Zalmai, right? Rashid's son, who idolizes Rashid and who misbehaves with Layla and Miriam when Rashid is around, because he's certainly picked up on how Rashid treats Miriam and Layla, and therefore he mimics him. What? Yes, and he's a sweet little boy when Rashid is not around. And Layla certainly loves him the way that she loves Aziza, which she was wondering if that was going to happen, but she absolutely does. Okay. Yeah. All right. So notice, please, we are jumping again. All right. In date. These are the kinds of things that, so we were in the fall of 99 and we are now in the summer of 2000, right? Okay. So months have jumped by. And I don't know, have any of you seen the movie Titanic with Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet? Okay, yeah, that gets talked about now. So I want you to think about Titanic, the movie, and how it might symbolize the circumstances in this book. Okay, I want you to think about Titanic as a symbol, right? What does it represent that is larger than the movie itself? Okay. All right, 41. In the summer of 2000, the drought reached its third and worst year. In Helmand, Zabul, Kandahar, Villages turned into herds of nomadic communities, always moving, searching for water and green pastures for their livestock. When they found neither, when their goats and sheep and cows died off, they came to Kabul. They took to the Kara Ariana hillside, living in makeshift slums, packed in huts, 15 or 20 at a time. That was also the summer of Titanic, the summer that Miriam and Aziza were a tangle of limbs rolling and giggling, Aziza insisting she get to be Jack. Quiet, Aziza Joe. Jack, say my name. Kala Miriam, say it, Jack. Your father will be angry if you wake him. Jack, and you're Rose. It would end with Miriam on her back, surrendering, agreeing again to be Rose. Fine, you be Jack, she relented. You die young, and I get to live to a ripe old age. Yes, but I die a hero, said Aziza, while you, Rose, you spend your entire miserable life longing for me. Then, straddling Miriam's chest, she'd announce, now we must kiss. Miriam whipped her head side to side, and Aziza, delighted with her own scandalous behavior, cackled through puckered lips. Sometimes Zalmai would saunter in and watch this game. What did he get to be, he asked. You can be the iceberg, said Aziza. That summer, Titanic fever gripped Kabul. People smuggled pirated copies of the film from Pakistan, sometimes in their underwear. After curfew, everyone locked their doors, turned out the lights, turned down the volume, and reaped tears for Jack and Rose and the passengers of the doomed ship. If there was electrical power, Miriam, Layla, and the children watched it too, a dozen times or more. They unearthed from the TV from behind the tool shed late at night with the lights out and quilts pinned over the windows. At the Kabul River, vendors moved into the parched riverbed. Soon, from the river's sunbanked hollows, it was possible to buy Titanic carpets and Titanic cloth. From bolts arranged in wheelbarrows, there was a Titanic deodorant, Titanic toothpaste, Titanic perfume, Titanic pakora, even Titanic burqas. A particularly persistent beggar began calling himself Titanic Beggar. Titanic City was born. It's the song, they said. No, the sea, the luxury, the ship. It's the sex, they whispered. Leo, said Aziza sheepishly, it's all about Leo, right? So Leo DiCaprio was the star, right? Leonardo DiCaprio. Everybody wants Jack, Layla said to Miriam. That's what it is. Everybody wants Jack to rescue them from disaster. But there is no Jack. Jack is not coming. Jack is dead. Ooh, what is she saying there? Who might she be thinking of? Tariq, right? To her, that is Tariq, right? Who she loved and who is dead, right? And I don't know if you guys remember, but in the movie, Rose is engaged to an abusive man, right? Yeah. Then late that summer, a fabric merchant fell asleep and forgot to put out his cigarette. He survived the fire, but his store did not. The fire took the adjacent fabric store as well, a secondhand clothing store, a small furniture shop, a bakery. They told Rashid later that if the winds had blown east instead of west, his shop, which was at the corner of the block, might have been spared. Okay. Rashid has lost his business. That's not going to go well. They sold everything. First to go were Miriam's things, then Layla's, Aziza's baby clothes, and a few toys Layla had fought Rashid to buy her. Aziza watched the proceedings with a docile look. Rashid's watch was sold, his old transistor radio, his pair of neckties, his shoes, and his wedding ring. The couch, the table, the rug, and the chairs went too. Zalmai threw a wicked tantrum when Rashid sold the TV. After the fire, Rashid was home almost every day. He slapped Aziza. He kicked Miriam. He threw things. He found fault with Layla, the way she smelled, the way she dressed, the way she combed her hair, her yellowing teeth. What's happened to you, he said. I married a pari, and now I'm saddled with a hag. You're turning into Miriam. He got fired from the kebab house near Haji Yagub Square because he and a customer got into a scuffle. The customer complained that Rashid had rudely tossed the bread on his table. Harsh words had passed. Rashid had called the customer a monkey-faced Uzbek, A gun had been brandished, a skewer pointed in return. In Rashid's version, he held the skewer. Miriam had her doubts. Fired from the restaurant in Taimani because customers complained about the long waits, Rashid said the cook was slow and lazy. You were probably out back napping, said Layla. Don't provoke him, Layla Joe, Miriam said. I'm warning you, woman, he said. Either that or smoking. I swear to God, you can't help being what you are. And then he was on Layla, pummeling her chest, her head, her belly with fists, tearing at her hair, throwing her to the wall. Aziza was shrieking, pulling at his shirt. Zalmai was screaming too, trying to get him off his mother. Rashid shoved the children aside, pushed Layla to the ground and began kicking her. Miriam threw herself on Layla. He went on kicking Miriam now, spittle flying from his mouth, his eyes glittering with murderous intent, kicking until he couldn't anymore. I swear you're going to make me kill you, Layla, he said, panting. Then he stormed out of the house. When the money ran out, hunger began to cast a pall over their lives. It was stunning to Miriam how quickly alleviating hunger became the crux of their existence. Rice, boiled plain and white, with no meat or sauce, was a rare treat now. They skipped meals with increasing and alarming regularity. Sometimes Rashid brought home sardines in a can and brittle dried bread that tasted like sawdust. Sometimes a stolen bag of apples at the risk of getting his hand sawed off. In grocery stores, he carefully pocketed canned ravioli, which they split 5 ways, Zalmai getting the lion's share. They ate raw turnips sprinkled with salt, limp leaves of lettuce, and blackened bananas for dinner. Death from starvation suddenly became a distinct possibility. Some chose not to wait for it. Miriam heard of a neighborhood widow who had ground some dried bread, laced it with rat poison, and fed it to all 7 of her children. She had saved the biggest portion for herself. Aziza's ribs began to push through the skin, and the fat from her cheeks vanished. Her calves thinned, and her complexion turned the color of weak tea. When Miriam picked her up, she could feel her hip bone poking through the taut skin. Zalmai lay around the house, eyes dulled and half closed, or in his father's lap, limp as a rag. He cried himself to sleep when he could muster the energy, but his sleep was fitful and sporadic. White dots leaped from Miriam's eyes whenever she got up. Her head spun and her ears rang all the time. She remembered something Mullah Faizullah used to say about hunger when Ramadan started. Even the snake-bitten man finds sleep, but not the hungry. My children are going to die, Layla said, right before my eyes. They are not, Miriam said. I won't let them. It's going to be all right, Layla Joe. I know what to do. One blistering hot day, Miriam put on her burqa, and she and Rashid walked to the Intercontinental Hotel. Bus fare was an unaffordable luxury now, and Miriam was exhausted by the time they reached the top of the steep hill. Climbing the slope, she was struck by bouts of dizziness, and twice she had to stop, wait for it to pass. At the hotel entrance, Rashid greeted and hugged one of the doormen, who was dressed in a burgundy suit and visor cap. There was some friendly looking talk between them. Rashid spoke with his hand on the doorman's elbow. He motioned toward Miriam at that point, and they both looked her way briefly. Miriam thought there was something vaguely familiar about the doorman. When the doorman went inside, Miriam and Rashid waited. From this vantage point, Miriam had a view of the Polytechnic Institute, and beyond that, the old Karakhana district and the road to Mazar. To the south, she could see the bread factory, silo, long abandoned, its pale yellow facade pocked with yawning holes from all the shelling it had endured. Remember, that's where Bobby worked. Farther south, she could make out the hollow ruins of the Darulaman Palace, where, many years back, Rashid had taken her for a picnic. The memory of that day was a relic from the past that no longer seemed like her own. That is a metaphor right there. Memory of that day was a relic. A relic is something that is kind of ancient and sacred, and it's an object. Memory is not an object, right? Miriam concentrated on these things, these landmarks. She feared she might lose her nerve if she let her mind wander. Every few minutes, jeeps and taxis drove up to the hotel entrance. Doormen rushed to greet the passengers, who were all men, armed, bearded, wearing turbans, all of them stepping out with the same self-assured casual air of menace. Miriam heard bits of their chatter as they vanished through the hotel's doors. She heard Pashto and Farsi and Urdu and Arabic too. Meet our real masters, Rashid said in a low-pitched voice, Pakistani and Arab Islamists. The Taliban are puppets. These are the big players that Afghanistan is their playground. Okay, so here's a really good metaphor. Taliban are puppets. And it's important because it's also explaining the political situation. So what is a puppet? It's like a doll that you create and you move. Okay, so there's different versions of puppets. They're hand puppets. You put it on your hand and then you make, like they're talking, right? But there's also the puppets that are on strings that you can make move and dance. Yeah. And so the implication here, that metaphor is saying that these Pakistani and Arab Islamists have the Taliban as puppets on a string, right? They're doing what the Taliban is doing what the Pakistani and the Arab Islamists want them to. Rashid said he'd heard rumors that the Taliban were allowing these people to set up secret camps all over the country, where young men were being trained to become suicide bombers and jihadi fighters. What's taking him so long, Miriam said. Rashid spat and kicked dirt on the spit. An hour later, they were inside, Miriam and Rashid following the doorman. Their heels clicked on the tiled floors as they were led across the pleasantly cool lobby. Miriam saw two men sitting on leather chairs, rifles and a coffee table between them, sipping black tea and eating from a plate of syrup-coated jalebi, rings sprinkled with powdered sugar. She thought of Aziza, who'd loved jalebi, and tore away her gaze. The doorman led them outside to a balcony. From his pocket, he produced a small, black, cordless phone and a scrap of paper with a number scribbled on it. He told Rashid it was his supervisor's satellite phone. I got you 5 minutes, he said, no more. Tashakur, Rashid said, I won't forget this. The doorman nodded and walked away. Rashid dialed. He gave Miriam the phone. You with me back there, Mohammed?
Yeah.
As Miriam listened to the scratchy ringing, her mind wandered. It wandered to the last time she'd seen Jalil, 13 years earlier, back in the spring of 1987. Okay, who's Jalil? Yeah, Miriam's father. He'd stood on the street outside her house, leaning on a cane beside the blue Benz with the Herat license plates and the white stripe bisecting the roof, the hood, and trunk. And remember that was referred to in the first part when Layla, okay. He stood there for hours waiting for her now and then calling her name, just as she had once called his name outside his house. Miriam had parted the curtain once, just a bit, and caught a glimpse of him. Only a glimpse, but long enough to see that his hair had turned fluffy white and that he'd started to stoop. He wore glasses, a red tie, as always, and the usual white handkerchief triangle in his breast pocket. Most striking, he was thinner, much thinner than she remembered, the coat of his dark brown suit drooping over his shoulders and trousers pooling at his ankles. Jalil had seen her too, if only for a moment. Their eyes had met briefly through the part in the curtains, as they had met many years earlier through the part in another pair of curtains. But then Miriam had quickly closed the curtains. She had sat on the bed and waited for him to leave. She thought now of the letter Jalil had finally left at her door. She had kept it for days, beneath her pillow, picking it up now and then, turning it over in her hands. In the end, she had shredded it unopened. Now here she was, after all these years, calling him. Miriam regretted her foolish youthful pride now. She wished now that she had let him in. What would have been the harm to let him in, sit with him, let him say what he'd come to say? He was her father. He'd not been a good father, it was true, but how ordinary his faults seemed now, how forgivable when compared to Rashid's malice, or to the brutality and violence that she had seen men inflict on one another. She wished she hadn't destroyed his letter. A man's deep voice spoke in her ear and informed her that she'd reached the mayor's office in Herat. Miriam cleared her throat. Salam, brother. I am looking for someone who lives in Herat, or he did many years ago. His name is Jalil Khan. He lived in Sharonau and owned the cinema. Do you have any information as to his whereabouts? The irritation was audible in the man's voice. This is why you call the mayor's office? Miriam said she didn't know who else to call. Forgive me, brother. I know you have important things to tend to, but it is life and death, a question of life and death I am calling about. I don't know him. The cinema has been closed for many years. Maybe there's someone there who might know him. There is no one. Miriam closed her eyes. Please, brother, there are children involved, small children. A long sigh. Maybe someone there. There's a groundskeeper here. I think he's lived here all of his life. Yes, ask him, please. I'll call back tomorrow. Miriam said she couldn't. I had this phone for 5 minutes only. I don't. There was a click on the other end, and Miriam thought he had hung up. But she could hear footsteps and voices, a distant car horn, and some mechanical humming, punctuated by clicks, maybe an electric fan. She switched the phone to her other ear, closed her eyes. She pictured Jalil smiling, reaching into his pocket. Ah, of course. Well, here then, without further ado. A leaf-shaped pendant, tiny coins etched with moons and stars hanging from it. Try it on, Miriam Jo. What do you think? I think you look like a queen. So notice that that is in italics, and that's because she is remembering when he gave her that necklace. A few minutes passed, then footsteps, a creaking sound, and a click. He does know him. He does? It's what he says. Where is he? Miriam said. Does this man know where Jalil Khan is? There was a pause. He says he died years ago, back in 1987. Miriam's stomach fell. She considered the possibility, of course. Jalil would have been in his mid to late 70s by now, but 1987. He was dying then. He had driven all the way from Herat to say goodbye. She moved to the edge of the balcony. From up here, she could see the hotel's once famous swimming pool, empty and grubby now, scarred by bullet holes and decaying tiles. Are you with me, Jeffrey? And there was the battered tennis court, the ragged net lying limply in the middle of it like dead skin shed by a snake. All right, and that's a simile because the word like is there, right? The ragged net lying limply in the middle of it like dead skin shed by a snake. I have to go now, the voice at the other end said. I'm sorry to have bothered you, Miriam said, weeping soundlessly into the phone. She saw Jalil waving to her, skipping from stone to stone as he crossed the stream, his pockets swollen with gifts. All the time she had held her breath for him, for God to grant her more time with him. Thank you, Miriam began to say, but the man at the other end had already hung up. Rashid was looking at her. Miriam shook her head. Useless, he said, snatching the phone from her. Like daughter, like father. On their way out of the lobby, Rashid walked briskly to the coffee table, which was now abandoned, and pocketed the last ring of jalebi. He took it home and gave it to Zalmai. So this next chapter is an event that I remember very well when it happened in 2001. And yeah, you guys will know what it is too, at least you kids from Kabul. 42, Layla. In a paper bag, Aziza packed these things, her flowered shirt and her lone pair of socks, her mismatched wool gloves, an old pumpkin-colored blanket dotted with stars and comets, a splintered plastic cup, a banana, and her set of dice. It was a cool morning in April 2001, shortly before Layla's 23rd birthday. The sky was a translucent gray, and gusts of clammy, cold wind kept rattling the screen door. So notice we've jumped another year almost. This was a few days after Layla heard that Ahmed Shah Massoud had gone to France and spoken to the European Parliament. Massoud was now in his native north and leading the North Alliance, the sole opposition group still fighting the Taliban. In Europe, Massoud had warned the West about terrorist camps in Afghanistan and pleaded with the US to help him fight the Taliban. If President Bush doesn't help us, he said, these terrorists will damage the US and Europe very soon. A month before that, Layla had learned that the Taliban had planted TNT in the crevices of the giant Buddhas in Bamiyan and blown them apart, calling them objects of idolatry and sin. There was an outcry around the world, from the US to China. Governments, historians, and archaeologists from all over the globe had written letters, pleaded with the Taliban not to demolish the two greatest historical artifacts in Afghanistan. But the Taliban had gone ahead and detonated their explosives inside the 2,000-year-old Buddhas. They had chanted Allahu Akbar with each blast, cheered each time the statue lost an arm or a leg in the crumbling cloud of dust. Layla remembered standing atop the bigger of the two Buddhas, Bobby and Tariq, back in 1987, a breeze blowing in their sunlit faces, watching a hawk gliding in circles over the sprawling valley below. But when she heard the news of the statue's demise, Layla was numb to it. It hardly seemed to matter. How could she care about statues when her own life was crumbling dust? So within the last 5 years or so, they've created holograms where the statues used to be. And so there's like a light stream to put the statues back in there. But of course, you can't replace 2,000-year-old artifacts. Let's see, until Rashid told her it was time to go, Layla sat on the floor in the corner of the living room, not speaking and stone-faced, her hair hanging around her face in straggly curls. No matter how much she breathed in and out, it seemed to Layla that she couldn't fill her lungs with enough air. On the way to Kartaseh, Zalmai bounced in Rashid's arms, and Aziza held Miriam's hand as she walked quickly beside her. The wind blew the dirty scarf tied under Aziza's chin and rippled the hem of her dress. Aziza was more grim now, as though she begun to sense with each step that she was being duped. Layla had not found the strength to tell Aziza the truth. She had told her that she was going to a special school where the children ate and slept and didn't come home after class. Now Aziza kept pelting Layla with the same questions she'd been asking for days. Did the students sleep in different rooms or all in one great big room? Would she make friends? Was she, Layla, sure that the teachers would be nice? And more than once, how long do I have to stay? They stopped 2 blocks from the squat barrack-style building. Zalmai and I will wait here, Rashid said. Oh, before I forget. He fished a stick of gum from his pocket, a parting gift, and held it out to Aziza with a stiff, magnanimous air. Aziza took it and muttered a thank you. Layla marveled at Aziza's grace, Aziza's vast capacity for forgiveness, and her eyes filled. Her heart squeezed, and she was faint with sorrow at the thought that this afternoon Aziza would not nap beside her, that she would not feel the flimsy weight of Aziza's arm on her chest, the curve of Aziza's head pressing into her ribs, Aziza's breath warming her neck, Aziza's heels poking her belly. When Aziza was led away, Zalmai began wailing, crying, "Ziza, Ziza!" He squirmed and he kicked in his father's arms, called for his sister, until his attention was diverted by an organ grinder's monkey across the street. They walked the last 2 blocks alone, Miriam, Layla, and Aziza. As they approached the building, Layla could see its splintered facade, the sagging roof, the planks of wood nailed across frames with missing windows, the top of a swing set over a decaying wall. They stopped by the door, and Layla repeated to Aziza what she had told her earlier. And if they ask you about your father, what do you say? The Mujahideen killed him, Aziza said, her mouth set with wariness. That's good. Aziza, do you understand? Because this is a special school, Aziza said. Now that they were here and the building was a reality, she looked shaken. Her lower lip was quivering and her eyes threatened to well up. And Layla saw how hard she was struggling to be brave. If we tell the truth, Aziza said in a thin, breathless voice, they won't take me. It's a special school. I want to go home. I'll visit all the time, Layla managed to say, I promise. Me too, Miriam. We'll come to see you, Aziza Joe, and we'll play together, just like always. It's only for a while, until your father finds work. They have food here, Layla said shakily. She was glad for the burqa, glad that Aziza couldn't see how she was falling apart inside it. Where here you won't go hungry. They have rice and bread and water and maybe even fruit. But you won't be here, and Khala Maryam won't be with me. I'll come and see you, Layla said all the time. Look at me, Aziza. I'll come and see you. I'm your mother. If it kills me, I'll come and see you. The orphanage director was a stooping, narrow-chested man with a pleasantly lined face. He was balding, had a shaggy beard, eyes like peas. His name was Zaman. He wore a skull cap. The left lens of his eyeglasses was chipped. As he led them into his office, he asked Layla and Miriam their names, asked for Aziza's name too, her age. They passed through poorly lit hallways where barefoot children stepped aside and watched. They had disheveled hair or shaved scalps. They wore sweaters with frayed sleeves, ragged jeans whose knees had worn down to strings, coats patched with duct tape. Layla smelled soap and talcum, ammonia and urine, and rising apprehension in Aziza, who had begun whimpering. Layla had a glimpse of the yard, weedy lot, rickety swing set, old tires, a deflated basketball. The rooms they passed were bare, the windows covered with sheets of plastic. A boy darted from one of the rooms and grabbed Layla's elbow and tried to climb up into her arms. An attendant, who was cleaning up what looked like a puddle of urine, put down his mop and pried the boy off. Zaman seemed gently proprietary with the orphans. He patted the heads of some as he passed by, said a cordial word or two to them, tousled their hair without condensation. The children welcomed his touch. They all looked at him, Layla thought, in hope of approval. He showed them into his office, a room with only 3 folding chairs and a disorderly desk with piles of paper scattered atop it. You're from Herat, Zaman said to Miriam. I can tell by your accent. He leaned back in his chair and laced his hands over his belly and said,